My name is Joe Willis, and welcome to Mindset Monday on Blue H.E.L.P's Facebook page. We've done these for a while now, so most people who will be joining us uh, already kind of understand what we do here and the purpose of these conversations. But once again, if this is the first time you're joining us, go ahead and hit the share button, start hitting the like, just get the message out there, because what we want to do is get this spread before we get the conversation started. So now is the perfect time to start inviting friends and reminding people, hey, it's time for Mindset Monday on Blue H.E.L.P. But what we do is we try to kick off the week with some sort of a conversation with a guest where the goal is to be better by Friday. And it really doesn't matter what perspective we're looking from or who it is we're talking to. Everyone we've had on the show has given us a little something for anyone to walk away with that helps prepare them for the week. We started off with some goal setting stuff. We've had some mental health experts come in. We've had widows and widowers, a lot of different participants in this show who have shared just a little bit with us every time. And so tonight, like every other guest, we're super honored to have here with us. This is actually a kind of a unique one. We said we'd be bringing in some Blue H.E.L.P board members. Well, this one, once again, is Dr. Jeffrey McGill. He's the vice president and co-founder of Blue H.E.L.P and has had a career in law enforcement, 15 years with one agency, Okaloosa. I think I said that right. Okaloosa, yeah. I say it wrong half the time. But before that, he was a Marine and has spent his career since then in law enforcement. Now he's currently the director for the academy at the college, Jeff.
West Florida State College.
And where they do all the in-service training and the advanced training for law enforcement in the area, but they also do all the academy classes. He's also a best-selling author and co-wrote the book, The Price They Pay, with Karen Solomon, the president of Blue H.E.L.P. So what we've really wanted to do tonight was have a conversation with Jeff about, first of all, Blue H.E.L.P in general. Where are we at now? Where are we going? Where have we been? I want to kind of have that conversation with you and introduce you to the audience that sees you behind the scenes, has seen your picture on the website and that kind of stuff, but a little bit more about who you are and what you do with Blue H.E.L.P. But then also, Jeff is a student or a study of Stoicism, and I'm super fascinated by the work he's doing and what he's learning. And so I kind of want to pick your brain about that tonight as well, and I don't think I'm alone in that. So without any further ado, Jeff, tell us a little bit about what I missed in your introduction there and how you got started with Blue H.E.L.P. And I know that's a loaded question, but tell us about that.
So yeah, I'll try to keep that as the short story. Blue H.E.L.P kind of has changed over time, and as we ended up writing The Price They Pay, Karen and I co-wrote that. And then with conversations after the fact, people were asking, well, what are you guys going to do next? What's on the agenda? And we didn't really have an agenda. We didn't know what was next. And so requests started coming in for different things, different services. And so we started looking at trauma and stress and mental health within law enforcement. And then ultimately we got to suicide and law enforcement suicide, and the numbers were staggering. And services weren't being offered, and we weren't doing the right things as a culture to address this. And so that's where we started focusing our efforts. And so, I benefited a lot from some post-traumatic stress, mental health services, some peer support services, and things that made me better in the long run after my partner was shot. And so, it helped me grow. It helped me change who I was and get to the other side of things. And so we wanted to be able to either provide these services or point people towards where they could get these services themselves so that, other officers can get through these kinds of things. And so that's kind of where Blue H.E.L.P initially started. The further we delved into law enforcement suicide, we found out that the widows and widowers that were left behind were commonly left without any assistance or weren't provided additional tools or additional resources that would have been available had this been a normal, what they'd consider a line of duty death. And so we started to try to reach out to the widows and the families and say, hey, what can we do for you? And we're a very small organization. And so we have limited funds, but what funds we had, we've made some big strides. And we started to force a conversation that was uncomfortable for a lot of law enforcement leaders. It's uncomfortable for a lot of senior law enforcement officers. I mean, I came up in a time where this was not a conversation. We didn't talk about this in the academy, but all of my students get it now. My bosses didn't talk about this. It was a cultural thing. And it's not that they probably didn't talk about it because they didn't want to. It's they didn't know any better, and we didn't have a lot of good information. So we do know better now. And so this is something that we need to be talking about. And so Blue H.E.L.P has pushed this. We've pushed it with legislation. We've pushed it with testimony. We have been out front having these conversations. And certainly Karen is the point person. I like to stay in the background. I'm kind of a behind the scenes kind of guy. But these ideas and these concepts come from the board, and we push this agenda forward. And Karen does a great job at getting that word out for us. And so as we go forward, I think the big questions that we as a board are trying to discover, or we're trying to answer is, what's next for the organization? We are currently working on the first suicide memorial site located in Texas. That is a big priority for us. We want somewhere that the families feel comfortable going to. We want to host our events there, and we want to bring families and loved ones and other officers in so they have a place to reflect on the officers they've lost. Or even if you're still a working officer, it's a place that you can reflect on where you are with your own mental health and what you need to do to protect that so that you can make it through a full career. I tell my new recruits all the time, it's no good to work your 25-year career, and we already have a early death rate just due to our lifestyle throughout that 25-year career. But I tell them, I want you to milk the state for everything you can, get all that retirement money you can, and enjoy the rest of your time. But that requires good physical health and good mental health throughout your career so that you can enjoy those benefits that you've earned so desperately. So that's kind of where we're going now. We're, like I said, looking at some other options for family support services. A lot has to do with, like I said, funding and donations. So that's what we rely on. We don't have any. The board is not paid. We have one paid employee who does a phenomenal job for us, helping us to stay on track because the rest of us are working full time. And Blue H.E.L.P is an undertaking after that.
Yep. Yeah, you had so much wrapped up in there, and I'm going to circle back around to a couple of those things with you. One of the things I want to point out for everybody, Jeff was pretty clear about what he said there as far as Karen is definitely the face. She's the most commonly seen, the most prolific on all the social media platforms. But without a doubt, there is this team behind her, and it's largely been led, by Jeff and some of the other, founding board members. Steve is another one that we all often kind of turn to for those, moments of guidance. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? And that sort of thing. And you've been very instrumental in kind of the voice of reason through a couple of things, and as far as the sounding board that we often turn to. And so, from your perspective, you mentioned that you've seen a culture change, and you've seen kind of the slow progression over time, I think was kind of the way you said it. And it certainly wasn't that way when we were younger. People just weren't talking about these things, but we're creating that culture. What's the biggest thing you think is changing that as we move along? What's making that change happen?
So it depends on where you are across the country. Some of the new leaders that are coming up are adopting things quickly because they know it's the right thing to do. Some are being forced to adopt it because we're forcing. Blue H.E.L.P started out very early on with having these tough conversations and initiating them, but we decided we weren't going to go away. So if your agency didn't want to talk about it, that's fine. We're going to continue to talk about it. And so we've backed some of the leaders who don't want to talk about it into corners, and now they're forced to address it because it's in their face. It's out on the news. We have some significant contacts with national media that is pushing this along for us. And our agenda is to have this conversation occur, because if we're talking about it, there's going to be a change of some sort. And so that's kind of the biggest thing is, like I said, we have some early adopters. There's some big agencies that are doing phenomenal things with suicide and mental health in their efforts. And then we have some slower agencies. I'm down in the south of the United States. Now I live in Florida and South Alabama. And so we have some of these agencies that are very old school still. And some of the bosses have not adopted the appropriate practices, what we would call best practices now, in when it comes to mental health and suicide. So, we're still having these conversations with some of these agencies going, hey, this is something you need to consider, and don't wait till it's at your doorstep. It's too late to try to figure these things out when it's on your doorstep. And we still get those calls. Blue H.E.L.P gets those calls that says, I've had a suicide in my agency. What do I do now?
Yes.
It's so much better if you have planned for this ahead of time, or that you've done the work to prevent. And that's kind of the things we keep pushing.
And what are some of those best practices? So you mentioned a couple of them, obviously, is having the policies in place, knowing what the answers to the questions are going to be. That's a big one, and I think you'll probably build on that quite a bit. But then you mentioned also the training piece. But what are some of the best practices that you're seeing agencies, the more proactive agencies, pick up?
So there's a couple things that I see here in my area specifically. We're not a very large area. We're not Chicago or New York. And so some of the resources that are available in some of these bigger areas are not necessarily available here. And I have actually traveled to a couple different states teaching about this topic. And I talk to the leaders and I talk to the supervisors, and I say, look, so there's a couple things you guys need to be doing that's not being done. I said, first, you need to find a professional mental health worker who can assist your agency. And it can't be anyone. It's got to be somebody who's credible, somebody who could speak the language and understands police culture. So the first officer involved shooting I was involved in, I was sent to a mental health psych person for a fitness for duty evaluation. He did not understand police culture. It wasn't his fault, but I could have talked my way around him all day long. He didn't understand my thought process and where I was. And so it would have been easy for me to get a clearance and get right back to duty if I so chose.
Right.
So for agencies that are smaller or in rural areas that don't have these resources already in place, go find one now. If you're a chief, a sheriff, if you're a command staff, you can go contact your local mental health services that are out there and teach them police culture.
Yep.
Blue H.E.L.P will help teach police culture, but you put them in the car with your officers. You bring them out to calls. You let them see and understand what officers are dealing with on a daily basis, and let them start learning about why we do what we do. That's a huge thing. Plus, it introduces that mental health worker, whoever it is, to your officers, because you don't want me to try to be building a relationship with a psychologist, psychiatrist, whoever it happens to be, when I'm in crisis.
Absolutely.
You need that relationship up front. And so, you could do this early. In our area, we have a phenomenal chaplains program. This isn't a religious plug. Religious or not, doesn't really make any difference to me. For me, the way I see the chaplains program is they're a great ear, and they will listen. And because the chaplains programs in my area are heavily embedded in the law enforcement agencies, they understand the culture. And so they have been a phenomenal tool here. So the other things that I'm a big fan of is training the families. So I had a chief in Ohio who had me come up there, and I taught his officers one day, and I taught their significant others the next day. He brought the families in. He provided daycare at the police department. On and on. So he made this readily available. He was heavily invested in this idea. And I got to sit down and talk to the spouses and the significant others and say, hey, what is it that you don't understand? And we talked about police culture, because a lot of families don't understand it. I've talked to many, many officers who stick to the philosophy of not bringing the job home. And I get that to a certain point, but home has to be where you can have these kind of conversations and these releases. And so if your spouse or significant other understands the culture, and you can introduce them to it in a careful environment or controlled environment, so they're not, the first time you come home and you go, hey, I've been involved in an officer-owned shooting and I've killed somebody, that's a tough conversation to start with if they don't understand the culture from the get-go. So you got to introduce this early as well. And so I'm a big fan of teaching the families. In addition, it helps the families to know who they need to contact. So the families didn't know who their resource was. If they thought their officer was having a mental health problem, what was the resource? And so I got the chaplain's phone number and said, you call this number. And I put it up on the whiteboard for him. I said, this is your chaplain. You call him. He will know who to talk to next. And so that's a big thing I'm a proponent of. Finally, you mentioned policy, and policy is a big, big deal. I tell people all the time, agencies need to have a policy that the officers know about and the families know about of how something's going to be handled if they have a mental health issue or if they're dealing with a suicide. So let's just talk about a mental health issue. If I think that I'm going to lose my job, and if I report that I'm having problems, I'm having troubles dealing with a call, let's say I've had a death of a child, which is a traumatic event for almost every officer, the death of a child. If I'm having trouble dealing with that, and I think that I'm going to lose my job if I report that to my boss, I've got my own kids to feed. That's not an option. If I have to choose between my job and feeding my kids, that's not an option. I'm feeding my kids. And so you got officers in your agencies who are scared that they're going to lose their jobs if they report this. We need a clear policy. What is the plan? Okay, if Jeff's having a hard time and he goes in and reports this, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to go see a mental health counselor. I'm going to get a fitness for duty evaluation. What is your plan to get me back to work? If we have officers who are injured in the line of duty physically, we have a very clear plan. We are going to file a workers' comp first reported injury claim. Workers' comp's going to step in. We're going to go to the hospital. We're going to get treatment. We may see a specialist, whatever it happens to be. Eventually, we're getting a fitness for duty evaluation and we're back to the road. Workers' comp's going to clear us and we're back on duty. That's what your officers need for mental health. This is the same kind of injury. There is, the military has taught us a tremendous amount about trauma and stress, courtesy of the wars we've been fighting for the last 15 years. We have been doing functional magnetic resonance imaging on our soldiers. And so we take them, we do these brain scans, we send them off to war. We bring them back, we do these brain scans, we send them back to war. We can see brain changes. This is a physical change due to trauma and stress. The same changes are occurring at in your officers back home. So it's a physical injury. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean that it's not physical. There is a change in the way the brain functions.
Absolutely. So yeah, I heard, quite a few things wrapped up in there, but I think one of the biggest was the getting the mental health providers early involved in the entire culture of the agency and law enforcement, right? So you get the climate of the agency, the individual relationships with the officers, and what is policing and why do we have the stigma that we have and how do we overcome that? Another thing that I really appreciated you pointing out, because we've had some great conversations with chaplains along the way at various conferences we've been to and we've hosted, where it is not necessarily about religion and bringing the chaplains in for that purpose. They are the initial point of contact above all else in some agencies where they know, and I think you said it was, you put that number on the board and say, start here, because they know who to call next. They know where to go after this. And so that was a big takeaway. And then involving the families, because, and this is actually where I was going to go next with you, was the conversations we've had with the widows over the last several years. Some of the things we've learned about what could have been done before. And you mentioned that getting families involved in training, get them involved in the climate and the culture and awareness of policies and resources, great place to start. Things have gone too far. We have to involve the families now and take care of them in the aftermath. What have we learned at Blue H.E.L.P as far as taking care of families, agencies' responsibilities when it comes to death by suicide?
We have seen the full spectrum, and I've spent some time at conferences listening to some of the widows' stories, and there are some that the agencies have gone out of the way. They've done above and beyond and treated it like a full line of duty death. Everything was taken care of. It was all lockstep. They had a clear plan in place. And then we've seen others where the body was barely out of the house when the agency was pulling agency uniforms and equipment out of the house. We have to treat this like a line of duty death. There is, if for no other reason, and I don't know how many other states have this, but in Florida, we have something called the Heart and Lung Bill. And the Heart and Lung Bill basically says that I've had a physical, because as a law enforcement officer, you get a physical the day you start or before you start at your agency, and a doctor signs off and says, hey, they are fit for duty. They're ready to go. The law, the Heart and Lung Bill that we have here in Florida says if I have a heart problem, blood pressure, breathing problem, lung is usually associated with the fire department because they're covered under the same law. It says that it is automatically assumed that my physical health has changed in a bad way because of my job. I don't have to prove it. It's automatically assumed because I started on day one with a clear bill of health. So the same thing should apply with the brain, where you gave me a psych eval before I started. You've given me a clear bill of health. It should be automatically assumed that something has changed. And it may, once again, my heart may change because I eat McDonald's every day. That
Sure.
could be the problem, but that's not the assumption under the law. My brain may change because of any number of things. Officers are dealing with all kinds of stress, just like everybody from the general public, but the job doesn't help. And so treating these deaths, these suicides, like a line of duty death and having a plan and having someone there for the family, serving as a liaison, going, this is what's going to happen. Here's how we're going to treat the body. Here's how the funeral is going to go. We have had our agencies that just abandoned the widows and said, hey, it's all you, good luck. And have issued orders to officers attending the funerals. You can't wear your uniform. You cannot attend in your uniform. That is part of the culture problem. And we've got to change that.
Absolutely. No, that's one of the biggest takeaways I had, and I had a feeling that's where you were going, is we have had these conversations with countless now, unfortunately, and the experiences. One of the biggest takeaways I've had is the disparity. There is no consistency in the treatment of death following suicide, and the families and insurance. This is going back to the policy piece, but one of the biggest takeaways we've seen is have those policies in place as to what's going to happen in the aftermath regarding insurance, regarding right to benefits and that sort of thing, because the wrong time to answer those questions is in the days afterwards. And the majority that do that are reacting on emotion, and some emote correctly and they get it right and they take care of the family, and others just destroy that relationship and the family. So that was spot on from what I've seen as well. So one of the other things that I wanted to have a conversation with you about tonight was you recently attended a pretty long course on Stoic philosophy and Stoicism, but this has been something, a passion and interest of yours for quite some time. And so if you can, kind of tell us a little bit about Stoic philosophy and the role it plays for law enforcement, resiliency, and this sort of thing.
So let me start with a couple caveats, because with any suggestion, with any idea, there's always well, what about this? So anything I say, first, I'm not an expert in this field. That's not my thing. I'm going to tell you how I apply it to me and give you some suggestions on how it can be useful for law enforcement. But take what you can from this to benefit you. The basic tenets of any philosophy, any belief in life should be, is this making my life better? And if it's making your life better, then you go forward with that. And if it's not, try something else. Next, I want to say that the concepts within Stoicism are very simple. They're very basic, but they're far from easy. That has been the most troubling thing for me is, one of the beliefs in Stoicism is that you are only troubled by your interpretation of an event. And so I have bad road rage. That is my interpretation of the event. And so I'm troubled by that, where I get angry when traffic is not moving properly or not moving fast enough and I'm trying to get somewhere. And so, but that's just my interpretation. So I understand that in my mind, but it's not easy to do this in the moment. And so you have to continue practicing these things. Much like we teach a lot of officers, and we teach the military as well, combat breathing or tactical breathing, and people ignore it and don't adopt it and don't try to learn how to use it because, once again, it's simple, but it's not easy. And so the concept is just, oh, this is too simple. I'd rather do something else. So we blow off things that are simple and choose things that are more complex because they think they're helpful. Next, I want to point out that everybody's story is unique, but a lot of what you're facing is universal. And I'll explain this in a very simple way. If we're talking about Stoic philosophy, we're also talking about the Greeks and Greek mythology in that. And so everybody knows the story of Achilles and the great battle of the Trojan War and all that. Well, Achilles' right-hand man was a guy named Ajax, and he was a brilliant military general, according to Greek mythology. And Ajax is involved in a military campaign. He returns home, and at night he is struggling. He's having flashbacks, the equivalent of what we now know as post-traumatic stress flashbacks. The Greeks at that time, this is 5th century BC, they charted it up and said, hey, this is a goddess playing a trick on him. So he wakes up during these flashbacks. He goes outside. He slaughters all his cattle, believing it's the attacking enemy. He goes back into his bed and goes back to sleep. And he wakes up the next morning, finds that he's done this, and he's hugely embarrassed. And he is contemplating suicide, and he's talking to one of his friends in the tent. His friend comes outside, and he's talking to the other friends of Ajax who have gathered there. And I'm going to read this because it's brilliant. It says, from his words and his deep grief, it looks obvious to me that he's thinking of doing some great harm to himself. But that's why I'm out here, my friends, to ask you to go inside and help him in any way you can. The words of friends can often cure a man in his condition. And so this is written by Sophocles in 5th century BC, and this is peer support. This is how universal these concepts are, how universal Stoicism is, peer support, mental health. Certainly, they didn't understand some science behind it. They didn't have functional MRI. They didn't have these things to see brain changes, but they knew that the words of friends could save lives. And that's how universal this is. So Stoicism for me is a coping mechanism. And there are lots of tenets to it that we won't be able to get into everything. But the basic idea is to help you understand that life is challenging. People, and I deal a lot with a lot of younger generations coming up, and there's a lot of misinformation associated with them. Some of it is true, but there's some misinformation associated with them about them not being able to handle hard times. And so life has hard times. There are hard times associated with it, and there's a struggle. And so, to first understand that the expectation for life is to struggle, not to have the easy road, not to have the easy street. That's not what Stoicism believes. Stoicism is you're going to struggle through life. You're going to have challenges. This is how you think about those challenges. And so the object is to find peace while you're dealing with these things. So it tries to take the emotional side out of the driver's seat. And so, we all have our emotions, and some of us are more controlled by them than others. So I'm within Blue H.E.L.P. I'm commonly used as a sounding board by some people, some other members who are a bit more emotional in their responses, because I rarely get riled up about something. It is certainly, I understand frustration, but that's not my response. I want to work my way through to the other side of that and figure out how we're going to deal with it as an organization. And so when you're looking at that for officers, we want our officers to have a stoic response in the face of trying times. And so what we're seeing in the news is certainly trying times for law enforcement across the country. I feel terrible for these guys who are on the front lines. I'm in an academy environment at this point. My life is pretty mellow compared to where I came from.
But it used to be, no doubt, right?
Absolutely. And so, these officers are dealing with traumatic events, the normal traumatic events that were going on for years and years. Like I said, we talked about the death of a child, but now they're having to deal with the riots in the public and misinformation that's coming out from the media about what officers are doing and what they're trying to accomplish. And so that is wearing on officers. And so we have to get past that emotional response and get to what is our locus of control. How can we, what can we actually affect? What can we influence or change? And if it's not within our locus of control, we need to focus our efforts somewhere else. And so even within Blue H.E.L.P, we have these conversations about what can we control and what can we influence, and how do we best use the resources that we have. And so for officers, like I said, when you're frustrated with the public in general and what you're seeing on the news, you can't influence that. But the next call you're on, you can certainly influence your interaction with that member of the public. And you can influence how that plays out directly. And so in the long run, if we have enough officers making that kind of interaction, that's what the public is going to be left with. And I'm a big law enforcement supporter, so I'm not buying what the media says.
Sure.
The vast majority of the contacts law enforcement have a positive outcome in the end. That is our locus of control. We can't be wrapped up in the emotional things that are going on with the media. And so that's kind of how stoicism plays out for me in law enforcement. In addition, I think one of the big things that that law enforcement officers are facing, and like I said, I've seen it. So I will give you my firsthand effects of this. I've dealt with a lot early on with child abuse calls that were just horrendous, and then child death investigations as a young patrol officer. And not being able to affect that is really tough. It's one of those things that it changes you because you can't control it. And as officers, we teach them. And like I said, I'm in the academy. So we teach you from day one that you are to have control of everything all the time. Well, that creates this persona within you where you believe that you have to have control. And certainly on scenes, I need you to be in control. We can't have officers sitting on the roadside crying when there's chaos going on. If we're at a motor vehicle accident, we need you to calm the family while the child is injured, calm the mother and father, get the child medical treatment, things like that. I can't have you breaking down there. But we have this misunderstanding within law enforcement that we have to have control all the time. And that's not reality. Reality is you don't have control. And when reality really hits you, and so for me, when reality really hit me was when my partner got shot in the face and I didn't have control. I couldn't fix the problem. When he was going to get medical treatment, he was on a life flight helicopter. They wouldn't let me on the helicopter with him because there wasn't enough room. I didn't have control. And truly, I have very little medical experience. There's not much I could do for a gunshot wound to the face. But that's not what it felt like. It felt like I needed control of the situation.
And to the leg, by the way.
Yes, to the leg. He will remind you.
He's not here to remind us, but yeah, one of the face to the leg.
Yes, absolutely. And so, if you have that persona stripped of you, that is a stressful event for law enforcement officers. They don't know how to deal with it. And certainly I didn't know how to deal with it. I was like, well, had I done this or had I done that? And you play the what if game, and you can play that for days and days and days.
So let me ask you, there was kind of a moment there because you obviously couldn't take the life flight to the hospital, so you had to drive. And that was kind of a traumatic, stressful event. You run code how many times in your life, but never for that reason. If I remember correctly, didn't that kind of play a part in some of your traffic experiences later on, and why maybe you've had to deal with some stuff?
So yeah, this is the entire reason I even have road rage. I am much like everybody else in the general public. I'm the only one who knows how to drive properly. If you ask anyone in the general public, everybody else on the road is an idiot, and I know how to drive. That's the way it works. I'm just like everybody else. But after this event, because I had to drive lights and sirens to get to an adjacent trauma center, adjacent city, and no traffic could move out of the way fast enough. And it doesn't matter. It wouldn't have mattered. It had everyone done everything correctly, pulled to the right and stopped and let me go. I was going to be mad because it wasn't fast enough. I couldn't get there. Once again, I needed that control. And so that played out in the long run. The next time I ended up driving, I spent an extensive amount of time in the hospital. Eventually I had to go home and change clothes, take a shower. Once I knew my partner was stable, I went to the house. Next morning, I was coming back to the hospital, and it was my first time in the car since I ran code to the hospital to try to get to him. And I hop in the driver's seat, and I start taking off, and my wife is a paramedic, and she's in the passenger seat, and I start sweating profusely. My breathing is elevated. My heart rate jumps up to about 140 beats a minute, and I have no idea what's going on, but I am livid. And this is a Saturday morning. It's still early. There's not a lot of traffic on the road, but I am extremely angry. And this was a triggering event for me. So we know a lot about triggers and associated with traumatic stress. This was one of those events. I didn't recognize it at the time. I didn't understand what was going on, but it had set me into an early panic attack. Eventually we got this figured out, got it sorted out. I don't usually have panic attacks associated with these things anymore, but it took some time to get used to just driving again. I'm not nearly as angry as I used to be, but I want traffic to get out of my way. And it's still tied to that. It's how my brain rewired itself. Once again, these are brain changes. If you could have watched my brain in this event and the weeks after, you could see how the brain actually changes blood flow to make some of these shifts, and how the chemicals change and the balancing changes. So
you mentioned a couple of things in there that I want to go back and kind of highlight, is that there's this concept that may be created, almost a false narrative that may be created by saying Stoicism is a powerful and effective technique that can be used by law enforcement, because some may pick that up and say, yeah, we're supposed to be stone cold, all the time. We don't need to reach out. We don't need to get help. You were very clear about there's a time for it. There's a time to be the cool, calm, composed person that is expected of the profession. And that's not to say that when you do realize that in this moment I'm having a panic attack in the driver's seat for no reason, that now has to be one of the times that I have to be hard and stoic. So kind of help us, explain from the Stoicism perspective how one reconciles that.
Joe, it's like you set me up for home runs. It's almost like you planned this out for me.
Hey, but once again, folks, I'm going to remind Jeff and everybody else, there were no pre-posed questions. I'm just genuinely curious. So go ahead. Yeah, what do you have to say on that?
So here's the thing. There's a famous Stoic. His name's Marcus Aurelius. He was a Roman emperor, and he was the single most powerful man in Rome at the time. And he adopted Stoic philosophy. And one of his great quotes, and I happen to have it on my screen here, so I'll read it to you. It says, "Don't be ashamed to need help. Like a soldier storming a wall, you have a mission to accomplish. And if you've been wounded and you need a comrade to pull you up, so what?" That's brilliant. That is, once again, that's talking about your law enforcement officers. So what if you need help? That's what your comrades are there for. This is and he is like I said, a Roman emperor. He led the biggest army in the world at the time. He was a powerful general. When he ultimately died, his soldiers wept for him. He was so well loved by them because he was such a great leader. And this is the kind of person who is out there talking, and this is the kind of leaders we need in law enforcement, who goes out there and goes, yeah, you have a mission to accomplish. And for us law enforcement officers, our mission, like my mission that day, was to make sure all of my friends went home safe. We were on a warrant service when my partner got shot. Well, that didn't happen. And so now I needed help. And so what? That's the big thing.
Spot on. Yeah, that is almost exactly. I was not obviously expecting it to be a quote sitting there ready to go, but exactly what I expect you to say was that there is nothing in this. Anyone I've ever talked to that subscribes to this and that has kind of enlightened me on it, there's nothing to say that it has to be that traditional, passed down from generation to generation, hard ass mentality of I don't need anything, I got this all on my own. There's none of that there.
No.
But in the moment, there is something to be said for developing the sort of character and professional command presence, really, of you are a police officer. You are calm, cool, collected in the face of everything else irrational. But if I understand, what I do understand of Stoicism up to this point is that a lot of these irrational feelings, these passion, emotion-driven feelings, are not what we should base our decisions on in the moment, that we should allow logic and wisdom to prevail. And how that happens, I'm kind of curious to continue the conversation. But as we experience them, it's not impossible for even the most stoic individual to experience some sort of a passionate response to something, that visceral gut emotional feeling. It's the override of that needs to be trained. So that's, I guess there's a question in there about that. But then there's also the how do you build on that? So, okay, I experience these on a regular basis. I'm likely to have an emotional response to something. What do I do? How do I learn to overcome that?
So a couple things. First, when you're talking about an emotional response, let's go down to the very basic animal level for humans. If I'm a law enforcement officer and I'm clearing a building and I'm making my entry, I go inside and I hear a gunshot, I'm going to have a startle response. We can't train that out of you. That is the animal instinct. That's the animal response. That is an emotional response as well. It's that same side of the brain, the same area is kicking that up. And so as we're having that emotional response, the Stoics believed, once again, so what? That's the norm. Everyone's going to have that emotional response. The question is, what do you do next? So this is where reason and logic take control. And hopefully for law enforcement officers in this case, this would be where training takes control. And you would revert to your level of training. And so hopefully you would stop what you're doing, call some other officers, surround the facility, depending on what's inside. If there's no people inside, we could hold what we got and surround and call out. Let's try that method. So, that is one thing on the lowest level, the basic level of animal instinct and emotional response. If we get a little higher in it, and we're talking about the emotional responses associated with a call, and so we'll go back to the death of a child, because once again, this is a universal kind of thing. The death of a child usually results with an emotional response. Once again, this is often tied to that lack of control. I couldn't save the child. I've had friends, I've had officers that done CPR on children and have not been able to save their life. And that is a frustrating thing, because to us, life isn't fair, right? It's one of these blatant things where it points to us and says, you don't really have control while we taught you this. And so dealing with the emotional side of it, the sadness, the frustration, the anger is also often very much the flip side of the coin to sadness. So a lot of people display anger when what they really are is sad or frustrated about the situation. And so dealing with that kind of thing is, once again, your response. So it's not the triggering event. It is how you have responded to it. If you first can recognize what your response is, what your feelings are, that's the first step. You need to recognize this is the situation. Once you've recognized it, you can once again step back in and take control. And then you can start to realize, I did what I could do. I provided the best CPR I could provide. I used all the tools. I called for medical assistance, and work your way logically back through it. That is how you have to address these things. And you're not going to be able to address it one time and think it's going to go away. So this is something that is a constant battle, where you're going to have to fight that response and go, yes, I understand why I'm sad. I understand why I'm frustrated. These are the steps I did. I reverted my training. And this is what I will do in the future. So that's one of the first things. The issue that we're having is once you've let your feelings take control, let your emotions take control of you, then you yourself, your logical self, is no longer steering the ship. And once again, for officers, we've taught you be in control. And so for officers, and this works for everyone, but we're talking about law enforcement specifically. First, you need to identify who it is you want to be and then act accordingly. Your feelings will follow that. If you let your feelings start first, that will change your actions and that will change your identity.
Absolutely.
So it's got to be the other way around. You've got to decide who you want to be first. So for me, I used, and it wasn't me, so let me clarify. There was a team of us that were involved in my partner's shooting, Steve's shooting. And we used that trauma to train other officers. We built a curriculum and we talked about it and we debriefed it with officers from multiple agencies so that they could learn from the errors we made. And we used it as a tool. And it was a tool for them to learn. For us, it was a tool for growth. It allowed us, we identified who we wanted to be. We wanted to be people who trained and taught people to do it better than we did it, so that they didn't make the same errors that we made. Then we acted accordingly. We went out there and we did our part. We and the first briefing was rough. I mean, it's tough to have those conversations because we would play the radio traffic. And every time the radio traffic plays, and it's been some time since I've heard it, when it plays, I'm right back there. I'm on the scene because everybody else is hearing it over the radio. For me, it plays like it's in real life because I could hear it in person. We were physically there. And so once again, another one of those triggering events. So we have that. We acted accordingly. We went out and we trained. And the feeling was, one, it helped us heal. Well, I won't say us. We all went out and did it. It helped me heal. I will speak for myself. So it helped me heal. It helped me get further into training and seeing how important that was for officers. And so it helped. It changed my method from having feelings in control, where I was constantly, what if I had done this? I could have saved my partner. I could have done that. I could have, and going through that cycle, I flipped it around and chose my identity first. And that's what the Stoics want you to do, is figure out who it is you want to be and then act that way. Your feelings will fall in line. Don't let the feelings be in control.
That's a perfect answer to the question I asked you. You hit it on the head for me, and I think others as well. I'm not getting a lot of questions, but we're getting a lot of likes and that sort of thing. If you have any questions for Jeff, we've got a few more minutes remaining. Please go ahead and say something other than how wonderful he is and how you want to be like him when you grow up. That's actually something similar has already been said. And also, don't worry, Steve, I got you. We'll always remember, right? You've covered so much for us, but to kind of recap, I think the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you tonight is I know I'm not the only one who wonders about these things. We talk about it, and we're often told, somebody even made the comment that her husband had to be stoic at a fellow officer's funeral and be the one to kind of lead everybody through. And in the moment, he had to have the hard facade that goes with being stoic in the moment. But then afterwards, he was able to let it out with her and demonstrate his emotion. And I think sometimes that people I've talked to about this in the past often get that confused. And I was Again, folks, we don't rehearse these. Jeff, I asked you no questions in advance,
Nope.
but I knew you were going to hit this on the head for me, that there is a difference. You don't have to be this hard exterior all the time. And sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not even about being the hard exterior. It's about being the calm, collected, cool exterior. And correct?
Right.
Um,
That's the big thing. This is not stoic as in the definition of being unemotional. That's not what stoic philosophy is. When we're talking about stoicism itself, it is how you look at life and the events that occur. And so for me, I rarely have a lot of ups and downs where, I've had some bosses that were moody. I'm sure some people who are on here have worked for some moody bosses. I am fairly steady. Part of the thing, and I joke about this all the time when I'm at work. I work with a lot of academics outside of my building, and their entire career has been in academia. And so when they ask me about different things or they appear stressed, my response to them is they're not shooting at us. So this is an easy day. So until they start shooting at us, we're okay. We're going to make it through this. And so, it's about being stable and
stable.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the term where you're not overly flustered by things, and it helps you ride out. Now, certainly, like I said, there are things that are traumatic to me. Let's see, we're almost a year ago, I lost my mother. From me, that was a traumatic event, and it was tough dealing with that. Dealing with the planning of the funeral and what we were going to say, and writing the eulogy. That was tough for me. But I relied on some of the Stoic philosophy and some of the things that I had dealt with in the past to try to balance myself and find my way through that. Certainly, it wasn't an unemotional event. There were tears shed. I was upset. I was mad. I was sad. I was angry. But it's how you respond to it and how you deal with it over the long haul. So the one thing I want to point out, and I know we're running short on time, so I just want to mention that Stoicism is tied, in my mind, it's tied to resiliency. And people get a lot of confusion about resiliency and your ability to bounce back. They think that you're supposed to bounce back to be who you were before some kind of traumatic event. And that's not how it is. Resilience allows you to bounce back and find a new method, a new way forward. And it doesn't have to be who you were before. You could be better than who you were before after a traumatic event. There's post-traumatic growth. There's a lot of discussion about that, where you can learn from these things. And like I said, like what we did, we helped others learn from it. And we still use this tool to push forward because we think it's a valuable tool to save other officers' lives and save other families from dealing with what we dealt with. And we talk them through what it's like to be involved in an officer-involved shooting. And so Steve will talk about it firsthand. What was it like for him? And when you get him to talk about it, he'll tell you that the shooting itself was the small part. That wasn't the hugest deal for him. For him, it was what the shooting did to his friends and family. And so I'll get out there and I'll talk about being the friend, being the family. If you use your traumatic event as a teaching tool or as a growth tool so that you can help others, I think that's a big deal. It's kind of a treat fire with fire kind of methodology that we would see, where fire crews go out and burn out a perimeter to keep a fire from spreading. That's kind of what we were doing. We were going forward with it and going, hey, this is how you can use this so that it helps you. And in the long run, it helped us, or it helped me. I won't speak for anybody else. It helped me deal with it.
Yeah, and I've heard the story. I've seen you present on it a couple of times. I've heard the tapes actually, which are heart stopping, and I wasn't there. So I can just imagine what it's like hearing it again. And you know, we are going to have Steve on eventually, and we will, you know, have that piece of the conversation with him. One of the things, kind of as we get ready to close out here, we did get a couple of questions or comments here. One of the things, I'm going to read one here while you answer this one, which is, it came from Joshua Green, which is, coming from a small department, what would you recommend to officers that don't have support from their agencies?
So I've actually told officers that they need to go find themselves a mental health person right now, today. And you may have to travel to another city adjacent to you, whatever it takes. Look at it like a dentist. You go see a dentist, most of us, twice a year. Every 6 months, we go get our teeth cleaned. They do a checkup on us, and they see if we're okay. And then we go about our business. We don't show up at the dentist just when our teeth are falling out. It's too late then. So start a mental health, or start working with a mental health person now, today. 2, if your agency is not involved in peer support, you may be able to seek some help within a region. And so in my area, there's some smaller teams that are available, and there's discussion about forming a regional team. Or, like I said, if there's a big city close to you, they likely have a peer support program that is out there. See if you can get involved. Go get your certification and become part of that team. So I'm not affiliated with, I'm affiliated with my college campus agency at this point. I'm not affiliated with any of the other local agencies any longer. And so I do debriefings for them at their request. And so an adjacent agency may call me and go, hey, our officers were involved in this. Can you come do a debrief? And so that helps them because, one, I'm an outsider. I don't belong to their agency. And so the officers feel safe having these conversations with me. And 2, I have street credibility because I've been there and done that. And so it's for me, it's beneficial because, once again, I'm still giving back. So go get your certification and help others. So mental health person, do that. If your agency is not going to have a policy or procedure in place, then you need to start working out with your significant other or your family or your friends what your plan is going to be. Hey, if I'm struggling, hey, I need to be able to come and call you and talk to you. Who is your person? Like, I know if I'm struggling, I know who's going to answer the phone. Who is your person? And that person needs to know they are that person, and start having these conversations. I get it. They're tough to have, and they're uncomfortable to have. But if you build this groundwork now, it's much easier when you're in crisis. And crisis shows up at random times. We are a small area where I live, and we've buried way too many officers. So we've buried 4 officers since I've been here. It's tough.
Absolutely. And next time we have you on, we'll kind of maybe talk through that story. Maybe actually have you and Steve on at the same time and kind of talk through that experience that you all went through, because it's incredibly powerful. And I don't want to cut you off, and because that could take a whole other show. Just that piece alone. That, but I do. If you're interested, I'd love to have you come back on and with Steve and kind of have that conversation with us. And Jeff pointed out about we really pushed the I Will Listen campaign, which is about getting that conversation about mental health started early and often, because the more we talk, the more we'll listen, and the more we listen, the more lives we'll save. It's not about being there in the moment of crisis. It's about being there, right? And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out this show. Jeff, thank you so much for your time tonight, and sharing all of this with us about Blue H.E.L.P, your experiences with Stoicism, and your learning path. And I hope everybody that was watching, there were some comments on here. If you want to maybe kind of scroll back through them, and if there's something that somebody asked or whatever that I missed, if you want to comment on it, I'll see what I can do as well.
Yep.
But I do want to let everybody know tonight. So occasionally you see me holding up my Team One Network Cup. They're good friends of ours. They have sponsored us and supported us in many different ways over the last couple of years. We learned this week that Team One Network had their conference, and it was a virtual conference this year with only a couple people in Virginia, but about 50 people from across the world. Actually, they were in UK, Israel, and a couple of other places. They're donating $3,200 as a result of that conference. A donation was made by the conference attendees. So special thank you to Team One Network and all of the instructors there that contributed. And again, we'll see here next week. We've got Dan Green from the National Association of Field Training Officers on to talk about moral injury with us. So super excited, looking forward to that one. But Jeff, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Yes, sir. Thank you.